Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your coach and host, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode, you may have recently seen on the Netflix special Quarterback. He is a psychologist, has extensive experience providing behavioral health assessment and therapy services to children and adults in clinical, residential, and professional sports settings. Throughout his career, he has been particularly interested in delivering person-centered care, tailoring his services to clients' preferences, values, and unique needs. His practice of psychology is guided by principles of resilience and well-being, which we'll talk about, using individual strengths, adaptive capacities, and sources of joy and purpose to facilitate positive change. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Dr. Brownell Mack. Today, Dr. Mack.
Doing well, Tyler. Thank you.
Well, excited to have you.
Pleased to be here.
Love to kind of help get our audience acquainted with you a little bit and just give us a little bit of your background and kind of the short story of kind of what led you to the work you do and the things you do on, people might have seen on the Netflix QB series that you're working with the Vikings and just what led you to the amazing work that you do.
Yeah, I would say that the short version of the long story is the cliche, right? That your profession sometimes chooses you more than you choose your profession. So I probably ended up in the mental health field based on my experiences and my family. So my mother is a devout Catholic, and she would often say that to those who much is given, much is expected. And I think that we didn't exactly grow up in the lap of luxury, but she was referring to those critical things that we can give to each other that don't have any cost. So being able to have patience and understanding for people and giving everybody the best chance to realize their full potential in life. So I think that was the foundation for me in many ways. And I grew up in the heart of South Minneapolis, so it's very much an urban existence, and gangs, violence, alcohol, substance abuse were all part of the environment. But I had a lot of protection around me, beginning with my parents and extended family at home, but a lot of mentors, coaches when I was involved in sports, and teachers who saw some potential in me that I hadn't even seen in myself, who encouraged me through education to kind of open up a world of possibility. And so I think that goes to the heart of my passion about making a difference for people professionally too.
I loved you sharing that story. I like what at the end there you talked about the people that kind of saw your potential. And I think a lot of times my experience around the student athlete environment is sometimes coaches are so over concerned with coaching skills or scheme or schematics, when really a lot of kids and athletes need someone to believe in their potential and to affirm that. Can you talk about just how critical and important that can be in just, I guess, everyone's lives, but especially young athletes?
Yeah, well, I would say too that it's amazing how much that dynamic plays out at the elite level in professional
For
sports,
sure.
where everybody is supremely talented, but the performance is only as good as the person. And so when we have athletes with the Vikings and really across the NFL who are struggling with something socially or emotionally, it's bound to show up in the performance on the field. And so we try to get upstream with those challenges as much as possible. So I'm involved in teaching classes to our rookies on decision making and stress management and healthy relationships. So they really have a sense of the resources that are available to guide them through some really complicated life matters. So 21-year-old young men often who are trying to find their way, and they've got money in their pockets, and people
Yeah.
are aware of it, so they have the pull of family and friends constantly, and then trying to make their way in a hyper competitive profession. They're just under an enormous amount of stress, and we try to give them the tools that they need to manage it effectively. And I think we see hopefully the same thing at the youth level, where I think more and more coaches are becoming aware of the significance of mental health, and knowing that if the kids that they're coaching aren't socially and emotionally well, it's going to be hard for them to excel in sports. So it's not really an either or; it's
Yeah.
a both and scenario, that we want to make sure that we're giving them everything that they can to succeed as athletes, but to know that they've got to be squared away when it comes to their coping and problem solving skills in order to be their best as athletes.
I love it. Um, and looking into your work, two of the things that jumped out to me was, that you guide your kind of work on the principles of resilience and well-being. And I think often, sometimes we observe people sacrifice some well-being in the name of resilience or pursuit of something. But can you talk about how you kind of define those two things and create a healthy balance?
Yeah, to me, a lot of it comes down to finding what I refer to as this intersection between important to and important for. So I think in my work, there are many people who are clear about what's important for them to do. So if they've been diagnosed with depression, they know that probably means therapy and maybe medication. But they have to find some reasons, a purpose behind doing all of that tough work that's involved in managing depression. And so that's kind of being clear about the why, or the important too. So I'll take my medication, I'll see the therapist, because it's important to me to be able to be the best parent I can be, or to be the best football player that I can be. So to me, that kind of goes to the heart of well-being. And resilience, I think, is something that is characteristic of all human beings. No matter how much you might be struggling, or how much difficulty or adversity is piled up on you, you have found a way to get through it. So what's happening when there's mental illness is just that the resources have gotten out of balance with the demands, so
Mm,
that people are facing some circumstances that are often beyond their control, that are overwhelming their coping system. But there are plenty of stories, if you can mine for them, that show how they have been adaptive in the past, how they've been able to kind of summon their resolve to get through things that they didn't think they'd ever be able to overcome. And so a lot of my work is predicated on trying to build out those narratives for people. And then when we find that there are certain obstacles that they need to strengthen problem solving and coping skills, the good news there is that we can help them do that through practice. Anything you practice, you get better at doing. And I think that philosophy is very accessible to athletes who can realize that there were a lot of things that were hard for them when they started out in their sport that became easy, that kind of went on autopilot later. Same thing applies to life skills and
yeah.
coping skills, the kind of things that I teach.
Into the kind of the coping skills and some of the teaching, and like you said, with practice we can improve. um are there ways, imagine a lot of times your teaching is in a classroom or office setting, or do you translate it to the field, or is there ways that you see at the highest level that they're creating space, for just the mental management that I imagine is required for the routine and you know demands of the NFL?
Yeah, I really feel fortunate because the team clinician role, the position that I hold with the Vikings, there are now 32 of us, so it's a mandated position. All the clubs have to have a mental health provider who is accessible and visible throughout the season, and in the off season too, where the work kind of pivots more toward helping couples and families often.
Mm,
But it's a very fluid position. So there are times when I'm working one to one with players and coaches, and it feels like a typical clinical setting, much of what I would do in my private practice, where someone comes in, there's a diagnosis, there's a plan, and we follow it. But a lot of the work with the team is spontaneous, and I think of it as kind of leading by walking around. So when you're embedded the way that we are as team clinicians, we have a lot of contact points with players. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's having meals in the cafeteria, or it's being available on the sideline at practice, and sometimes that will spark conversations that help us to find what we call, what's important now, the win.
Yeah.
So you develop a relationship with a player, and you find out that there is something stressful happening at home, something that might be on the edge of developing into a domestic matter. And then if we know about that early, then we might pull a player in to have a private conversation about what seems to be getting in the way in that relationship, and where are the opportunities to try to mend that relationship so that it doesn't turn into something that could be destructive, or something that can begin to interfere with performance in life in general. And then I would say too, because we are focused on prevention and education, when we have the classes on healthy relationships, for example, the players begin to see you as the clinician as someone who can be a bit of a sounding board, or available as a resource. So they'll initiate some of the conversations about what's important to them now. You don't have to seek them out as much. And,
Yeah.
that can turn into some really unique exchanges. I know when I first started, I didn't know all the rules and the ins and outs of the NFL. So I was on the practice field, and I had begun developing a relationship with a player, and he kind of came over to me on the sideline, and he was talking about something that he was going through with his mother that had been
Mm.
on his mind. We've been talking about that privately, but he wanted apparently to talk some more about it right there on the sideline. He started to put his arm around me, and I'm listening and kind of nodding and taking it all in. And I ended up going on to the actual practice field while we were getting into this conversation for just a brief amount of time, and found out later that that's really taboo. The coaches will frown upon anybody besides a player or a coach kind of stepping into that space. So it's one of those things
Yeah.
that you learn about, but at the same time, I felt fortunate that the player placed that kind of confidence in me. So it's one of those things where you
Sure.
feel like you might have to ask for forgiveness later, because I think that the greater good was trying to maintain that connection in the moment, and be responsive to what the player needed.
Yeah, connection, and you mentioned trust a little bit ago too is so important. Um, just for all coaches, is they do their job in creating that in the environments, but even I think, in the mental performance space, and when it comes to psychology, how do you find ways to, a lot of coaches that listen to this, maybe high school or college coaches that are limited by NCAA hours, or really short cyclical seasons in the high school environment. What are ways that they can help, create trust amongst their team and with their coaches uh, to hopefully get the best from their personnel?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to relationship always. And I think people respond to coaches or programs, organizations that respond to them. And so I really make a point of trying to meet players where they're at. And sometimes they will identify performance as the overarching goal, that they want to be able to play Division I football, or make sure they're in position to have a pro career. And so, I think it's helpful to go with their ideas and in their ambitions, and try to put them in the best position possible to realize the aspirations that they have for themselves. So much of it comes down to being able to, I think, empathize and join with people. And when you show up that way, uh, I think you quickly realize that, independent of whatever mental skills you're teaching, or whatever intervention that you're applying, the person you're helping is going to change to the extent that they see you as someone who is trustworthy and credible and caring. So you're the medicine in these situations. So I think being able to realize that you can have that sort of influence, and if you can be clear about, what is this person's, what are his conditions of satisfaction, and what can I do to best meet them. I think that's how you start to build up equity with people, by giving them the gifts that they need to become who they want to be, who they're striving to become.
I love that. Give them the gifts. I think you do that by, conversation and uncovering them. How do you go about helping them receive those gifts?
Yeah, I think so much of it is maintaining a presence. So, what's the expression that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I think when, at least, in my NFL life, you have to plant some seeds, I suppose. And you can be aware that there is a player who's kind of hanging on the edge emotionally, and he may have given you some bits and pieces, some little windows into what's really going on. But then you often, if you have taken the time to get to know him and to help him appreciate that you're constantly there, he'll walk into that doorway at some point, literally or figuratively. And if you're prepared to listen carefully and to offer him some valuable guidance, and give him the resources that he needs to manage whatever challenge might be in front of him, that's the way I think that you deepen relationship, and you foster trust. It's being there and responding to the needs in the moment.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things, as I hear you speak too, is you to talk about the relationships and building trust, and there is that element of assessment, and I think often youth in high school, college athletes I'm around, when you ask them, "Hey, who's your toughest critic?" they all raise their hands, and then you ask, "Hey, who wants to do an assessment?" You don't get as many hands, right? And so it's always kind of this, well, if you're your toughest critic, shouldn't you be your most fair evaluator? Can you talk about, I know you use assessment in probably a variety of ways, but why, you know, getting a variety of assessment can help us create the action plans that are going to help us, reach the goals or the destinations we want to?
Yeah, I think it's helpful, Tyler, to frame assessment on in a very similar way that you might discuss intervention or therapy in the clinical setting. So, trying to demystify what assessment is
Yeah.
about, that it's collecting information. So, trying to help the person, okay, what am I getting into with assessment, answering that question. And then the second question, I think, is what do I have to gain from it? So in the mental skills space, one way that I began to approach the possibility of an assessment or working with me to kind of hone those skills is to simply ask players, how much of your game do you think is quote unquote mental? How much of your success depends on having sharp mental skills? And there's really no wrong answer there. I mean, you'll hear estimates, well, at least 50%. Some will say 80%. Some say 99% of my game. It really comes down to how well I'm functioning mentally, because the perception is the reality. And so if you believe that being able to concentrate and being able to maintain your confidence and being able to stay focused in the moment means that much to your performance, it will have that kind of relevance. And then from there, you kind of get that initial buy-in, and that's where you can offer some of the concrete skills and strategies that might be helpful. So again, it's kind of appealing to the player's self-interest. If you are indeed invested in kind of accelerating your performance, what are some of the things that you can do? And so that might talk about, have you ever done any breath work? Do you know the science behind that? That if you can slow your breathing, that it decreases your blood pressure and your heart rate and gets the oxygen level up in your brain, which allows you to focus and to be more clear and to quiet your mind in ways that will allow you to excel on the field. So that's how I would kind of couch assessment with people, that it's a tool. It's a way
Yeah.
that we can gather information to get a sense of where you're at. And then from there, we kind of build a roadmap or plot a course to where you can be, and how to get there. And so that's when the skills and strategies, I think, come online.
Yeah, I like the way you frame it, because then I think it's easier to look at the assessment. There's a bunch of information. There's some I knew, there's some I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then gonna give you, um, yeah, the better way to kind of look at it for sure. Um, is there a a moment or a lesson through your work that you've kind of observed, either maybe it's a mental skill or a lesson in action, uh, that, just brought you fulfillment or joy, where you saw, something, whether it was talked, a tactic, or something you taught to the team, um, that you saw in action that just kind of brought fulfillment and
Yeah, and I think some of that is probably captured in the NFL quarterbacks documentary, and just a little bit of the backdrop there. That was something that was completely initiated by Kirk Cousins. He came in one day, and the camera crew was already with him, and he
okay.
said, Doc, I'm committed to doing this series here with Netflix, and I want to be as transparent as possible. And I think it would be valuable if we could show some of the work that we're doing together, and kind of pause a little bit and say, well, let's talk this through, because this is pretty unprecedented that
Yeah.
this kind of access would be allowed to what would normally be considered strictly private conversations. And so we figured out the boundaries of it. We had assurance from the production crew that we'd be able to view everything in advance before they decided to include it in the actual film. But I think what comes through there, and knowing what led up to it, that there's some TV magic, I think, that you see, where it looks like Kirk had been working on these skills for a long time, which he really has.
Yeah.
But the relationship that allowed us to kind of work well together took some time to form. So
For
this,
sure.
my fifth year with the team, and I've known Kirk throughout that period. But we started out talking about kind of common interests, things that are happening with our kids. We're both tennis players too, so I remember,
Nice,
there
nice.
was one story. Yeah, I'd get pulled into the quarterback room, just again walking around the building sometime, and Kirk would ask me some things about tennis and share what he knew as well. And he brought up something that he had talked to, I think it was Drew Brees, about, and he said, Doc, Brees said that one of the unique things about tennis is the only sport that involves a throwing motion where the object doesn't leave your hand. And I said,
Mm,
well, okay, that is interesting. Never really thought about it that way. But it's like these little moments that kind of build up and foster closeness and trust. And I think that some of that ultimately does come out in the film. That the true intervention there, sure, we're talking about visualization, in ways to enhance focus and staying in the moment, being able to let go of the past and not become preoccupied with things that can happen in the future. But the basis for all of that is a connection that says that what we get from each other is valuable and something that we cherish and want to not only maintain, but to allow others to see how this can really be replicated.
yeah.
You know.
I think it was I mean, I was probably one of my favorite parts of the series, being biased towards mental performance. And, as listening to hear how it kind of came about, grateful that, Kurt would include that, because I think so often we think that, there's the narrative that something's got to be wrong, right? Something's got to be wrong with you if you go see the sports psychologist, or there's problems. We're trying to create an atmosphere and demystify some of those things where you don't have to be sick to get better. You can see it's part of his pursuit to continually improve. Um, and I think just watching the series, what a likable guy. I don't know how they maybe you've seen behind the curtains, but I only became more of a fan of the guy watching that series as a whole human being. I think too is where it started, as we see that person, and so kudos to him for allowing that to happen. And I think it's going to help a lot of people and a lot of young kids as they see that over the next few years too. So. Um,
And I think we've already seen that from the response to the film. I can't count the number of people, and Kirk has said the same thing, who saw the mental skills segments in particular as validation of utilizing mental health services in general. So I think that those kind of portrayals do go a long way toward destigmatizing mental health care, and especially I think it can make an imprint for young people. And so, yeah, I think it's a very courageous move on Kirk's part that has paid a lot of dividends now, and I think will continue to make a difference into the future. How it humanized a great athlete, and so much of what we know or see about the players is with their helmets on, and they are kind of pieces sometimes in fantasy football leagues. And this gave, I think, insight into what it's really like to go through life as a professional athlete. So you have a great disappointment in losing a playoff game, but then that's got to end, and you got to show up as a dad and husband and tuck kids in at night, or you have to go assemble a crib after you've had a great victory. That's the real stuff where
Yep.
I get mostly involved in that. I find so exciting. There's all the glitz and the glamour of game day, no substitute for that, and there's a lot of cachet that goes along with being a part of the NFL, but the human dimensions are really the difference maker so often in how well an individual, or for that matter, a team performs.
Yeah. Being a dad, assembling a crib can be a stressful, a good place to measure our and use our mental skills tools.
It's a test.
Right. Sometimes reading a coverage simpler, putting a IKEA something together. Holy cow.
That's
Uh,
right.
well, also seeing some of the work you've been doing and doing a little research. I'd love to hear you talk about some of the DEI work you've done with the Vikings. I think, and just how to bringing up some practicality. How do coaches and leaders on teams ensure that the environments that they have are inclusive and equitable, and where people all have a voice? How can we ensure our teams are developing and moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think it is critical work that has been warmly embraced by our organization. So, our ownership has made a
Mhm.
sizable financial commitment to social justice initiatives in our community, well before we had the George Floyd tragedy, right? But
Mhm.
I think the social justice work started to take on even more relevance after that tragedy, and so many of our players really dug in and
Mhm.
found ways to try to empower people who maybe have the least, right? And in those who are most profoundly affected by racial inequalities and injustice. So I think it's just part of the lifeblood in our organization. So I mean, I walked into that. And then I think we had a really active and important conversation almost from day one about what it means to connect with athletes of color. So, more than 70% of the players across the league are black and brown. So, mental health means something different to them than it would for people who have more middle class white backgrounds. And so, we talked about how do we best tailor our support services to who players who may have stigma that is a barrier for them. And so, I've seen some research recently, Tyler, that shows that over 80% of Black men in our country see mental health services as something that is shameful to access or could be used against you. I don't know if the league has similar kind of survey data, but I can tell you anecdotally, that's something that I've had to try to navigate in my role. That I think we have a warrior mentality across the league, and so much of success in sports, as you know, often does come down to grit and determination. But to a limit, right? Because you
Yeah.
can try to force your way through situations and use the example of a physical injury. You push too hard, you can end up getting more injured, and then something permanently can happen that will be debilitating. Really, no different on the emotional side of things
Sure.
here, too. So, a lot of the message to the guys, especially our Black and brown players, is that vulnerability and showing it is really the ultimate sign of strength. And so we're trying to, reframe what it means to need attention to your emotional life, and then
Yeah.
to be available to them, to connect with someone who looks like them and has lived like them in many ways. I think that becomes a really compelling part of what I have, or what we have to offer as an organization. So we're talking to players about things that we have experienced. So as a Black professional, as a Black man, I know some things on an intimate level of what it's like to
Sure.
feel mistreated or misjudged. And even though I'm not maybe talking about that experience in explicit ways with players, I think some of that comes through, and it leads to an identification, and it helps to foster the kind of trust that's required to really be helpful to them to get through some of the barriers they see in accessing mental health care, and giving it their best shot, and being able to appreciate that, this does help, which keeps them going and keeps the
Yeah.
service sustainable.
I think people that listen to this podcast probably knows I've talked about my history, but I think, when I was give you a quick window, you played college football, very masculine kind of, I guess, ideology that I kind of brought up in, and, had a great career, end up working in professional sports, but I was working in the front office of the White Sox, and remember feeling kind of depressed and anxious and not myself. And the HR lady was like, "Would you want to go see a therapist?" And I remember my response being, "I'm a football player. I don't talk about my feelings."
Mm-hmm.
And I was glad that was the last time that really left my mouth,
Yeah.
except for in recounting it in this instance. But I remember that was just the initial response. The therapy that ensued for the next few months was transformational,
Mm-hmm.
and amazing. But I see a lot of, environments where, we don't talk about that. We compartmentalize that. We do that. Um, where it's been refreshing to be around more coaches, more teams, seeing and hearing the things even at the highest level that's going on, um, to realize that I think a lot of our peers in our locker rooms are going through some of the same things and challenges, and that it is okay to talk about it. And like you said, that vulnerability piece. Can you expand on just how important creating space and safe spaces to be vulnerable can be in building men the right way, so you don't have to rebuild broken men?
Yeah, no, great point. And I think so much of it is simply giving players the permission to talk about their emotional lives. To a man in our locker room, these are exceptionally bright and resourceful and resilient people, and they can do an incredible job of masking vulnerability. And I don't think we can escape the fact that almost faking it till you make it in sports. So you don't, in a competitive arena, want to signal that you're starting to waver in any way,
Sure.
right? So that gets deeply ingrained and can carry over to your personal life. But in your personal life, that approach has some limits, because you're not able to then get in touch with the things that are affecting you. And the people who want to be close to you and be supportive when you need it, they're kind of left at a loss if you're not being transparent about what's going on inside. So I think just being able to pull players into a private setting in a judgment-free zone to have kind of a free-flowing conversation about, what's going on emotionally. What are some of the things that you're finding stressful and difficult? And I think simply asking that question sometimes just opens up a whole well of concerns that have gone unspoken probably for way too long. And once they get started and they realize how good it feels to kind of set down that burden with me, pretty quickly they're doing the same thing with the people in their lives at home and their teammates and their coaches. We just see a real ripple effect
Yeah.
that way. The floodgates just kind of open once you are told that it's not only okay, but it's necessary to
For
talk
sure.
about what's happening inside.
For sure. I think definitely my own experience, the first time I talked about it was the scariest time, right? For sure. And then it became easier to discuss and help and reflect upon. As we wrap up, one more question I'd love to ask and always love to hear, in the work in your life and what you do, what brings you the most joy, Dr. Mack? What brings you joy?
Yeah, for me, it is being able to see people reach their highest potential. So a lot of my work is front loaded in the sense that rookies come in. We try to build connection with them and teach them some of the skills they need to excel both on and off the field. And some of those players are very, wide-eyed when they join us, and they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. They're talented. They wouldn't be here if they weren't. But then, almost year after year, when they're with us, you see the development. And for so many of them, you watch them kind of grow up before your eyes. And so that young guy who came in on day one and was really, completely scared and unsure of himself, kind of becomes this confident all-pro player in a few years. And to see that kind of transformation uh, is really uplifting, I think, and part of what keeps me going. But it's also the small kind of incremental progress that you can see as well. It doesn't maybe show up on the field, but you
Yeah.
know how hard someone is working to become a better version of themselves. And maybe if they never become an all-pro player, they have the satisfaction that, I really gave everything I had to this pursuit, and I can take a lot of pride in that. So, really, you never regret that you failed in the end. The regret comes that you didn't try. And so that's something that I really try to underline with guys, that if you've poured everything you can into becoming who you wanted to be, that's the victory.